The loan she never spoke of. Everyone in the family thought Grandma Leon was just frugal. She clipped coupons, reused Ziploc bags, and never turned the heat up past 65. But no one knew the real reason behind her thrift, not even her own daughter. The truth started one night, 20 years ago, when her youngest cousin showed up at her door, shaking, tearful, with a toddler in his arms and a bruised cheek. Said he'd been kicked out by his wife. Said he just needed a little help until he got back on his feet. Said, "You're the only one who's ever treated me like family." Leon didn't think twice. She gave him everything she had, cleared her savings, co-signed on a small business loan under her name, wrote a personal check to cover the down payment for a used car. No contracts, no interest, just trust. And then he disappeared. No calls, no thank you. Just vanished like a thief into fog. The bank came first, then the collectors. Leon, still too ashamed to tell anyone, said nothing. When her daughter asked about the mounting bills, she smiled. "I made a few bad investments. That was all." Over the years, the story of that cousin faded from the family. No one mentioned him. No one knew where he went. But Leon never forgot. Every month, she scraped together the minimum payments, skipped meals, and sold off the few gold bangles she brought from Vietnam. She carried the weight of that debt in silence, even as it cracked her back and hollowed her eyes. And no one ever asked why the woman who once loved to bake birthday cakes now couldn't afford a single candle. But Grandma Leon wasn't stupid. She remembered everything, every dollar, every lie, every silence, and she was patient, painfully patient, because someday, she knew, there would be a knock on his door instead. And this time, she'd be the one holding the papers. The years she paid alone. The debt didn't just take her money, it took her voice. After he disappeared, Leon stood alone at the kitchen table, staring at the final withdrawal receipt. Her balance was down to $23.41. That was the exact moment something in her chest went quiet. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just made a pot of tea and sat in the dark, letting the silence crawl across her skin like smoke. When her daughter asked, "Mom, did you finally buy that recliner you always wanted?" Leon smiled and said, "No, I changed my mind. Too bulky." Truth was, she'd canceled the order 2 days prior and used the refund to keep the electricity on. Leon learned to hide the debt in plain sight. She stopped going to Sunday lunches, claiming her knees hurt too much. In reality, gas money was a luxury. When the washing machine broke, she hand-washed her clothes at night so the neighbors wouldn't see. She learned which brands of instant noodles were cheapest per gram. And when the phone rang, she flinched, because it was never family. It was always a voice on the other end asking for money she didn't have, tied to a name she could no longer say out loud. She sold her wedding ring one rainy afternoon, walked to the pawn shop with it in her coat pocket, pressing it between her fingers like a prayer. The man behind the glass counter didn't even look her in the eye, just weighed it, scribbled a number, and slid over a few $100s, enough to pay interest for one more month. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was her birthday. That year, no one called. Not because they forgot, because Leon had spent so long downplaying herself that they assumed she didn't want to be celebrated. She sat alone, watching the candle flicker on a bowl of rice porridge. She whispered, "Happy birthday, old lady," and made a wish she'd never dare say out loud. "Bring him back just so I can look him in the eye." Sometimes, late at night, she scrolled through old contacts, found his number, hovered her thumb over call. But every time, she backed out, because she knew herself too well. If she heard his voice, That same voice that once said, "I swear I'll pay you back," she might forgive him. And she couldn't afford that kind of weakness anymore. 5 years passed. Then one morning, a letter came from the bank. A balanced summary of the original loan plus 5 years of compound interest. Leon read it 3 times. Her hands didn't shake. She just folded the paper, boiled water for tea, and sat down. That evening, she opened her laptop and typed 4 words she'd never thought she'd look up. How to buy debt. What started as a desperate search turned into a quiet obsession. She began attending free finance seminars at the local library, made friends with a retired loan officer, read case studies about portfolio transfers and corporate debt scavenging. And one night, by pure accident or fate, she stumbled across a portfolio listing. A spreadsheet of names and debt accounts being bundled for sale at a discounted rate. She scrolled. Her finger froze. There it was, his name, his number, his unpaid debt. Leon sat back in her chair. For the first time in years, her heart didn't race from fear, it raced from clarity. This wasn't revenge, not exactly. This was reclamation. She wasn't going to beg for her money back. She was going to own the damn IOU. And just like that, the silence of all those lonely years cracked, not from breaking, but from opening. She clicked Purchase Portfolio Preview, her breath steady, her spine straight. The game was about to change. The day her account emptied, it was supposed to be just a quick stop at the ATM. Leon had just finished buying groceries, eggs, 2 bundles of mustard greens, rice, and a single chicken thigh. She walked past the bakery, paused for a second in front of the taro cakes she used to get on Sundays, then told herself no. When she slid her card into the machine and entered her PIN, she wasn't expecting a surprise. But the screen blinked and spat out a number she couldn't make sense of: $23, $41. Leon stared at it like it was broken. She took out the card, reinserted it. Same thing. She checked her balance again, slower this time, like maybe she'd read it wrong. But no, her account had been emptied. Gone everything she'd saved, scraped, stashed over the last 10 years. It wasn't just confusing, it was insulting. There hadn't even been enough left for a round number. For a moment, she felt lightheaded. Not the dramatic kind of dizzy, just a quiet unraveling. Her fingers curled tighter around her purse, and she slowly walked back to her car without saying a word. She sat in the driver's seat, key in hand, engine off. That's when it hit her. She had trusted him with access. She de-signed off on the transfer so it wouldn't be tax complicated, so he could get the business started faster. That cousin, her late sister's only son, the one who'd called her Auntie Leon, my second mother. He told her he'd return every penny, promised it in front of Buddha, in front of her husband's photo. And now, not only had he vanished, he'd taken her name with him, because the loans were under her signature. The lines of credit, the guarantees, hers, not his. Back home, Leon boiled water and made herself a cup of weak green tea. She stared out the window, watching kids run down the block with popsicles. She didn't cry. It was worse than that. She went quiet inside. Her mind pulled up all the things she'd pushed down. The time he ignored her call for a week, the weird withdrawal alerts she hadn't questioned, the way he changed the topic whenever she brought up repayment. All of it. Like puzzle pieces that only clicked after you've lost the box. She picked up the phone, hovered over his name and her contacts. But something in her stopped. What would she even say? She knew the answer. She'd forgive him. Again. And that felt more terrifying than the debt. That night, she opened her notebook and started a new page. At the top, she wrote, "I am not stupid. "I am not done." Then she listed every bill, every late fee, every lie. She was done waiting, done excusing. From this moment on, she wouldn't just survive it, she would own it. And as she turned off the lights and walked past her empty wallet on the table, she whispered, "You didn't take everything. You left me angry. That was your mistake." What came next wasn't pretty, but it made her powerful. The day her account emptied, it was supposed to be just a quick stop at the ATM. Leon had just finished buying groceries, eggs, 2 bundles of mustard greens, rice, and a single chicken thigh. She walked past the bakery, paused for a second in front of the taro cakes she used to get on Sundays, then told herself no. When she slid her card into the machine and entered her PIN, she wasn't expecting a surprise. But the screen blinked and spat out a number she couldn't make sense of: $23, $41. Leon stared at it like it was broken. She took out the card, reinserted it. Same thing. She checked her balance again, slower this time, like maybe she'd read it wrong. But no, her account had been emptied. Gone everything she'd saved, scraped, stashed over the last 10 years. It wasn't just confusing, it was insulting. There hadn't even been enough left for a round number. For a moment, she felt lightheaded. Not the dramatic kind of dizzy, just a quiet unraveling. Her fingers curled tighter around her purse, and she slowly walked back to her car without saying a word. She sat in the driver's seat, key in hand, engine off. That's when it hit her. She had trusted him with access. She de-signed off on the transfer so it wouldn't be tax complicated, so he could get the business started faster. That cousin, her late sister's only son, the one who'd called her Auntie Leon, my second mother. He told her he'd return every penny, promised it in front of Buddha, in front of her husband's photo. And now, not only had he vanished, he'd taken her name with him, because the loans were under her signature. The lines of credit, the guarantees, hers, not his. Back home, Leon boiled water and made herself a cup of weak green tea. She stared out the window, watching kids run down the block with popsicles. She didn't cry. It was worse than that. She went quiet inside. Her mind pulled up all the things she'd pushed down. The time he ignored her call for a week, the weird withdrawal alerts she hadn't questioned, the way he changed the topic whenever she brought up repayment. All of it. Like puzzle pieces that only clicked after you've lost the box. She picked up the phone, hovered over his name in her contacts, but something in her stopped. What would she even say? She knew the answer. She'd forgive him. Again. And that felt more terrifying than the debt. That night, she opened her notebook and started a new page. At the top, she wrote, "I am not stupid. I am not done." Then she listed every bill, every late fee, every lie. She was done waiting, done excusing. From this moment on, she wouldn't just survive it, she would own it. And as she turned off the lights and walked past her empty wallet on the table, she whispered, "You didn't take everything. You left me angry. That was your mistake." What came next wasn't pretty, but it made her powerful. The pawn shop and the wedding ring. She didn't want to touch it. The ring. For weeks, Leon had opened her jewelry drawer, stared at the velvet box, then closed it again like it burned her fingers. It wasn't just gold, it was history. Worn thin with time, engraved with her husband's initials, and a tiny lotus flower he insisted made it less boring. He gave it to her in a bowl of hot rice on their wedding night, joking that she'd always find treasure where there was food. She laughed then. She didn't laugh now, but the electric bill was final notice. The medicine for her arthritis wasn't covered this month. The rice was running low. And she'd already sold the television, the the antique fan, and 2 jade bracelets her mother left behind. There was nothing else left to give except that ring. She picked a Tuesday. Rainy, gray, forgettable. She figured no one she knew would be out. She wore an old scarf and sunglasses, not because of the weather, because she couldn't bear the idea of being recognized. The pawn shop was 3 blocks from the bus station, tucked between a check-cashing place and a liquor store. Inside, it smelled like metal and old stories. Guitars hung on the wall like ghosts. Watches ticked from behind thick glass like they were counting someone else's time. She handed the box to the man behind the counter without looking him in the eye. He opened it, raised one brow, and said, "Sentimental." Leon didn't answer, just nodded once. He weighed it, ran a quick test, typed something into the computer. $250, he said flatly. She blinked. $250. For 37 years of marriage, 3 children, 6 hospital visits, and a man who made her tea every morning until the day he died. She almost walked out. She should have walked out. But her stomach growled at that exact moment, not from hunger, but from shame. So she said, "Fine," and signed the form. As he counted out the bills, she glanced down and noticed something. Behind the counter, in a pile of unclaimed items, sat a tiny jade elephant. It looked exactly like the one she used to keep on her dashboard, the one her granddaughter had broken by accident years ago. And just for a second, Leon felt the pull of time collapsing, as if everything she'd lost was somehow circling back, but not to return, only to remind her. She took the money, walked out into the rain, and when the cold hit her face, she let herself cry. Quietly. Not because of the ring, but because of what it represented. She had just sold the last piece of who she used to be, and no one knew. Back home, she stuffed the cash in an envelope marked utilities. Then she lit incense for her husband, staring at the empty spot on her finger. "Don't be angry," she whispered. "I didn't lose it. I traded it for a little more time." And that night, as the heater hummed back to life and the refrigerator started running again, Leon sat with a notebook on her lap and began drawing a chart. Not of money owed, but of systems, loopholes, leverage, names. Because if she was going to lose her ring, then someone else, someone who had taken so much more, was going to feel it too. She wasn't done. She was just getting organized. The call she almost made. The phone number was still saved under his name. She never deleted it. Not because she wanted to forgive him, but because erasing it would make it too easy for him to disappear completely. She wanted that number to live in her contacts like a scar, like a tooth that never healed right. Some nights, when the house was too quiet and the bills stacked a little higher, she'd scroll to it, stare, hover her thumb over the green button. And every time, something in her chest would flicker, anger, hurt, maybe even curiosity. That evening was the closest she'd ever come. The rain was coming down sideways outside, and her power had just been cut again. She'd been cooking instant noodles by flashlight, wrapped in 2 coats. The silence was so thick it felt alive. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, and for some reason she thought, just thought, maybe if she called, he'd pick up. Maybe he'd laugh like it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd say, "Auntie, I was waiting for your call. I know I owe you. I never forgot." Maybe he'd say sorry. She hit call. It rang once, then twice. Then, she slammed her thumb down on the red button, hung up before it could connect. Her heart thudded so hard she thought it would crack a rib. She sat there, breathing like she'd just run a marathon. Not because she was afraid of what he'd say, no. Because deep down, she was afraid he'd sound like he used to. And if he did, If he used that voice, the one that called her second mother, the one that said, "I swear I'll fix this," she knew she'd fold. Because forgiveness had always been her default, and that was exactly why he'd gotten away with it in the first place. Leon stared at the phone, screen still glowing. She wanted justice, but if she heard his voice too soon, it would turn into mercy. That was the real danger. So she blocked the number. She didn't delete it, just blocked it. A small, quiet decision, not revenge, not rage, just a boundary. The first of many. And as she put the phone down, her eyes landed on her notebook, the one with the diagrams, the debt codes, the names of collection agencies she'd been researching. And just like that, her hand moved, drew a new circle, labeled it leverage. Because she finally understood something, she didn't need to talk to him, she didn't need his apology. What she needed was ownership. Of the story, of the numbers, of the silence. And soon, she'd learn that silence itself could be a weapon. The birthday with no cake. It was the first time in 27 years that no one called her on her birthday. Not even by accident, not even a late text. At first, Leon told herself maybe the kids were planning a surprise, or maybe her phone was acting up again. But by noon, the silence was undeniable. The kind that doesn't just feel empty, it feels intentional. She sat at the kitchen table, the same one where, years ago, her late husband used to leave a single lotus flower and a card in broken English that read, "To my strong wife, still pretty." And now there was nothing but a chipped bowl of KOTR letter 1EAFNG and a boiled egg. No candles, no flowers, just steam rising from rice that tasted like memory. But this wasn't about the birthday. Not really. It was about what the silence confirmed. She had made herself invisible. All those months of lying, "I'm fine, don't worry, I don't need anything," had worked too well. She had trained her family not to look too closely, not to ask questions, not to see her. And they didn't. But what hurt most wasn't being forgotten. It was the realization that if she disappeared tomorrow, no one would notice until the water bill bounced. She pushed the KO away, appetite gone. Walked to her old bookshelf, where a yellowing envelope sat between cookbooks and tax receipts. Inside, a faded photo of her as a young woman standing outside her first apartment, holding a bag of groceries and smiling like the world was still fair. She traced the edges of that girl's face with her thumb and whispered, "They wouldn't forget you." Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She got up, grabbed an old matchbox, lit a single stick of incense, and placed it next to the photo. No prayer, no ritual, just a promise. "You're still here, and next year, if they don't bring cake, I'll make my own damn candles." That night, as the world went on without her, Leon opened her laptop and searched for bankruptcy filings. Not hers, his. She dug, cross-referenced addresses, tracked down credit history leaks, and suddenly, there it was. A court document showing that his new business had quietly defaulted on a secondary loan last fall. She stared at it, mouth half open. So he wasn't thriving like he pretended to be online. He was drowning too, and that changed everything. Because it meant his debt, her debt, the one he dumped on her, might have been sold off. Moved. Floating through the gray zones of third-party portfolios. She clicked over to a private debt marketplace and made an anonymous account. If his name showed up there. If someone was selling the remnants of that betrayal. She wouldn't just buy it. She'd frame it. The return of the debt collector. It started with a knock, not a loud one, just 2 short taps like someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. Leon opened the door and there he was. Not the cousin. Worse. A man in a wrinkled blazer holding a clipboard and a smile too polished to be honest. "Are you Mrs. Leon Tran?" She didn't answer right away. He held up a letter in a plastic sleeve. "We're here regarding an outstanding balance tied to a secured loan originating in 2012. You may want to sit down." She didn't. She took the letter with steady hands and read the words that landed like a punch to the ribs. $31,780, $64 owed, plus interest, plus penalties. Leon blinked. That was the number, her number. His loan, their silence. She had thought it was done, buried under years of late-night instant noodles, sold heirlooms, and skipped holidays. But the thing about debt, it doesn't die, it waits, it migrates. It changes hands, and eventually it comes home. The collector explained, gently, almost cheerfully, that the loan had been bundled, sold to a third-party agency, and due to recent restructuring, was being reactivated for recovery, which meant they could now garnish her pension. Legally, Leon didn't hear the rest. Her ears buzzed. Her breath went shallow. But she smiled, nodded politely, and said thank you like a woman being offered tea, not a cage. After he left, she stood at the window, watching the rain blur the street outside. It wasn't over. It had just circled back. Like rot that seeps through the floorboards you thought you de-fixed. She didn't cry. She boiled water. She sat with the letter on the table, smoothing the creases with slow, deliberate hands. Then she opened her notebook, flipped past the chart she'd started, the one mapping her cousin's business addresses, shell companies, social media lies, and wrote a single word in the margin. Now, because this wasn't just a second chance to fight, it was a legal gateway, a paper trail. The collector had given her more than a threat. He had handed her proof that the debt had changed owners, which meant it was out in the wild, buyable, trackable, claimable. Leon spent the next 3 nights scouring every debt exchange database she could find. She watched YouTube videos made by ex-collectors, joined anonymous finance forums under a fake name, and called an old accountant friend who owed her a favor. And then, buried deep in a private investor listing, there it was. Not her cousin's name directly, of course, but the LLC he used to funnel the loan. Still outstanding. Labeled as delinquent but collectible. Bundled with 3 other businesses up for auction in 2 weeks. Leon stared at the screen. Her heart wasn't racing this time. It was calm, focused, almost amused. She wasn't going to pay the debt. She was going to own it. She would become the person they feared when the phone rang. Not with rage, with paperwork, with power. With the exact kind of cold, bureaucratic control they thought she'd never understand. The quiet decision. She didn't announce it. She didn't tell her daughter. She didn't write it in her journal. The decision happened quietly, like breath, like instinct. One moment, Leon was just another tired grandmother boiling tea on a Thursday night. The next, she was a strategist. She had stayed silent for years, letting shame rot her from the inside, but something had shifted. Not with a scream, but with stillness. That kind of stillness people mistake for surrender, not realizing it's the moment right before the strike. The collector's visit hadn't broken her. It had clarified her position. And the deeper she dug into the world of distressed debt, the more she realized just how legal, how routine, and how absolutely weaponizable it all was. The very thing that had crushed her for years could be flipped. She'd always thought power belonged to the loud, the men in meetings, the sons who owned property, the cousins who ran their mouths. But now she understood something far more dangerous. Power belongs to the person who knows the system and says nothing. so she kept quiet. She began liquidating things under the radar. She sold the last gold pendant from her wedding trunk to an old family friend who paid in cash and didn't ask questions. She cashed in a small life insurance policy her husband had left behind, not the big one, just the quiet rider nobody ever paid attention to. Enough to enter the game. Then she practiced. She studied how to bid anonymously through proxy buyers. She rehearsed the calls. She mapped out timelines. She collected voice recordings, not of him, but of herself, speaking in different tones, just to hear which version sounded more. In control. And the night before the auction, she stood in her tiny kitchen, barefoot, sipping lukewarm tea, staring at the one light bulb still working above her table. "You're not getting revenge," she whispered to herself. "You're reclaiming value." She didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of precision. She watched the timer tick down, her finger hovering over the submit button. Her bid was clean, conservative, wrapped in layers of legalese to protect her identity. And when it went through, she sat back in her chair and laughed, actually laughed for the first time in months. She hadn't won the bid yet, but she knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. No one else would bother fighting for an old debt tied to a ghost company in a bundle of forgotten numbers. No one else had the motive, the memory, the map. That week, the weather turned cold. Her daughter called and asked why she hadn't been answering. Leon said she'd just been a little tired lately. Which was true, but it wasn't exhaustion, it was transformation. She was no longer just a woman who'd been wronged. She was a creditor in waiting. A woman with her name on the paperwork. And as she folded her laundry that evening, humming an old Vietnamese lullaby she hadn't sung since her kids were small, Leon glanced at her phone. No new messages. No birthday wishes. No apology. Didn't matter. Because soon he would get a message, not from her voice, but from her signature. And by then, it wouldn't be about debt, it would be about ownership. The name that vanished. It had been over a decade since she last heard his voice, but Leon still remembered the rhythm of how he used to say her name, soft, stretched out, like he was pulling sympathy from it. "Auntie Lien, only you understand me." That voice had cost her $30,000 and 10 years of quiet suffering, and now she couldn't even find him. Not under his real name, not under his business alias. Not on Facebook, not on Google, not even in old property records. He had vanished in the most calculated way possible, quietly, strategically, just like cowards do when they know they've done something unforgivable. But Leon wasn't searching with guilt anymore. She was hunting with purpose. It started with a tax ID number she found buried in a transaction history from one of his dissolved LLCs. That led to a warehouse address in Nevada. Not active anymore, but someone had signed the lease 5 years ago using a different name, Jason Luong. It sounded familiar, but wrong. That's when she remembered. It was his middle name, flipped and repurposed. A false front, a mask. She kept going. She checked domain registrations. She ran image searches on LinkedIn profiles that looked like cheap avatars. She even tracked down a Yelp review left under one of his shell companies, something about a late furniture delivery. The reviewer, a woman who called him Jay. That's when the twist hit. He wasn't just hiding, he was rebranding. He'd turned his shame into hustle, started a coaching business, selling financial resilience workshops to struggling immigrants, posting reels about building wealth from nothing while standing in front of rented Teslas. In every video, he wore clean white shirts and a silk smile, but Leon saw it. In his posture, in his eyes. he was faking it. And worse, he was monetizing the same story he had stolen from her. That was the moment the debt stopped being numbers on a page. It became war. She printed one of his flyers, taped it to the fridge, studied it every morning like a prayer. Her anger wasn't fire anymore, it was ice. Focused, sharp, enduring, and under that cold she began to build. She had already won the debt bundle. Quietly, legally. On paper, she now held claim to the unpaid balance from a company he thought was dead. But companies, like guilt, don't just disappear. They leave trails, and she now owned the trail. Leon called the collections agency she had partnered with and asked one simple question. If a new business uses an old entity's assets, is that actionable? The answer, yes, if proven. She smiled, because she already had proof. A clip from his live stream showing the same office chair he once bought using the original loan. A photo of him sitting at the same desk he'd claimed to have left behind when the business collapsed. A tax write-off in 2017 that overlapped with a payment she had made from her personal bank account. It was all coming together, not with bullets, not with screams, but with documents. Because the name he thought he'd buried, the one he erased from contracts, bank drafts, family invitations, Leon had just dragged it back into the light. And this time, she was the one holding the pen. The secret she learned to use. Leon had always believed secrets were something you buried to protect others. That's what her generation was taught. You didn't air your pain, you folded it into laundry, stirred it into soup, pressed it under your pillow at night. But this secret, the one she stumbled into late at night under the dim glow of her laptop, was different. It didn't need burying, it needed wielding. The moment she won the debt bundle, something shifted inside her. The shame she had carried like a second spine turned into leverage. Raw, clean leverage. Her cousin's unpaid loan, plus interest, plus default penalties, was now legally hers. She was no longer a victim. She was a creditor. And the power in that title? It was quiet but absolute. She studied how debt collectors operated. Not the shouting ones on TV, but the real professionals, the ones who sent polite letters with veiled threats wrapped in law. She learned how corporations protect assets behind shell companies. She studied the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act like it was scripture. And slowly, methodically, she began to move. She didn't come after him directly. That would have been too easy, too emotional. Instead, she started by freezing the old business account tied to the original LLC, the one he thought no one remembered. Then she filed a formal inquiry with a credit reporting agency, flagging that same entity for investigation. And when the agency replied with confirmation that the business was still active under a successor name, she knew she had him. But she didn't stop there. She filed a Uniform Commercial Code lien, a UCC1. It was a filing most small business owners ignored until it bit them. It placed a public claim on any assets tied to the debt, including equipment, inventory, and intellectual property. His online videos, his coaching brand, his merch, he didn't know yet, but she had quietly put a leash around everything he thought he owned. The next week, he posted a video bragging about securing a new investor. Leon watched it with her tea, then calmly emailed the investor's holding firm with the subject line: concerning unresolved liens attached to Mr. Liuang's entity. She didn't threaten, she simply attached documents, time-stamped, signed, verified. Within 72 hours, the video was gone. So was the investor's name from his page. That was the secret. The thing Lian had finally learned to use. Real power doesn't raise its voice. It writes things down. It files them in the right places. It waits. And then it chokes you, gently, legally, completely. She didn't feel victorious. She felt clean, like she had finally scrubbed something off her skin that had been sticking there for years. She began drafting one final notice. Not to collect the money, she didn't want the money anymore. She wanted him to know. She wanted him to sit in his overpriced office chair and realize everything he built sat on a foundation he no longer controlled. Because the same woman he thought was too soft to fight back was now the woman who owned the paper under his feet. The list with one name left. The printer hissed late into the night, spitting out the pages one by one, names, balances, file numbers, repayment histories. Lian sat in her kitchen in a worn cardigan, glasses perched low on her nose, reviewing the full portfolio she now legally controlled. 57 accounts. Some were just noise, small business debts, abandoned lines of credit, ancient bills that would never be paid. She circled and marked, redlined and categorized. She wasn't new to this anymore. She knew what to write off, what to pursue, and what to ignore. But then, near the bottom of the final page, she saw it. Account 1147. Business entity, Golden Rise Consulting. Primary signatory, Liuang Jason, a.k.a. Liuang Kwok Kong. Original balance, $31,000. Current balance with interest, $58,467. $12. Status, active but frozen. Recovery pathway, pending authorization. She stared at the name, not just because of what it meant, but because of what it represented, the end of her list. She'd combed through 56 others, cold, methodical, detached. But this wasn't about business. This was blood. Lian picked up her pen and wrote in the margin, slowly and with purpose. Do not release. Hold for personal action. In every training video she'd watched, every seminar she'd sat through in the back row, the experts always said the same thing. Debt is just math. Keep emotions out of it. But they had never seen their family's betrayal printed on letterhead. They had never spent a decade paying for someone else's lies. This one wouldn't be processed like the rest. She created a new folder, separate from the others. She printed a clean notice of debt ownership. Not to send, not yet, just to have. She signed it in blue ink, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote his name across the front in the handwriting she used only for sacred things: wedding cards, condolence notes, baby gifts. Now she used it for vengeance. It wasn't rage. It was ritual. She placed the envelope in her lockbox, right next to her husband's old Army medal and a Polaroid of her kids from 1989. Not because it belonged with them, but because this, too, was history. A wound wrapped in paperwork, a legacy corrected. She had all the power now, but she wasn't in a rush. No one knew about the list, not her daughter, not her friends. Just her pen, and that final name waiting quietly in the shadows. She would decide when the light found him. And until then, she let him keep living his life, his fake seminars, his plastic smiles, his curated image of success. Because sometimes, the worst thing you can do to a man like that isn't to destroy him. It's to let him rise high enough to fall properly. Lian poured herself another cup of tea, slow and steady. Outside, the night was quiet. Inside, the list was complete. There was only one name left, and she owned it. The face she finally confronted. She didn't tell anyone she was going. No warning, no build-up, no dramatic farewell. She just woke up that morning, made her tea, pressed her blouse, and placed the envelope into her purse like it was a piece of fruit she might offer or not. The train ride took 47 minutes. She sat near the window, watching unfamiliar neighborhoods roll by. As she passed a billboard advertising wealth mastery workshops, she smirked. The man who taught those workshops. She was about to walk into his office. The building was glass and steel, new money, fake prestige. In the lobby, a receptionist with acrylic nails and dead eyes asked if she had an appointment. Leon said no. She handed over a card printed with a company name she had set up just for this moment, Tranquil Recovery, LLC. The girl hesitated, then paged him. 10 minutes later, he stepped out of the elevator, wearing a tailored suit and a confident smile. The smile dropped when he saw her. For a full second, he didn't speak. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again like a fish gasping on dry land. She watched the color drain from his face, and something in her relaxed, not in victory, but in confirmation. He recognized her. That meant he remembered. That meant he knew. He motioned awkwardly toward a side room. They sat across from each other at a long conference table. Glass walls, no soundproofing, just tension vibrating like static. He cleared his throat. "Auntie Leon, it's been a long time." She pulled the envelope from her purse, placed it on the table without a word. He stared at it like it might explode. "What is this?" "Open it." Her voice was soft, almost bored. He did. Inside, the formal notice of debt reassignment, stamped and notarized. It showed that the $58,467, $12 he owed, plus ownership of the legal rights to pursue it, belonged to her. Not a bank, not a company, her. He didn't speak, just stared at the paper, then at her. He tried to laugh it off, but the laugh caught in his throat. "You bought this." "Why?" She didn't blink. "Because you thought you erased me. I just wanted to make sure you knew I was never gone. I was watching, waiting. Quiet doesn't mean weak." He leaned back, arms crossed, masking his panic with arrogance. "You won't actually collect on this." "Maybe not." She smiled gently. "Maybe I just like watching you squirm when the phone rings. Maybe I wanted you to know that every investor who Googles your name from now on will see my Leon before they see your photo." His jaw tightened. "You've already lost Kong," she added. "You just haven't felt it yet." She stood up, gathering her bag. He didn't follow, didn't apologize, didn't beg. Just sat there, like a boy caught with matches in a house already burning. As she walked out, the receptionist tried to make eye contact. Leon didn't return the glance. She stepped back into the sunlight, blinking at how bright it was. She felt tall, not younger, not triumphant, just clean, like something old and sour had finally been exhaled. That night, back home, she placed the empty envelope in her drawer. She didn't destroy it. She just kept it there, in case she ever needed to remind herself. There are 1,000 ways to reclaim your dignity. Some are loud, some are lawful. And sometimes the most powerful confrontation ends with no raised voice at all. She didn't need to ruin him. She had already made him live in fear. The button she press yet. Back home, the kettle whistled like nothing had changed. But everything had. Leon moved through her tiny apartment with the quiet calm of someone who'd finally stopped bleeding. The confrontation hadn't broken her, it had cleared the fog. She didn't feel proud. She didn't feel cruel. What she felt was settled, and beneath that, something even sharper. Control. The debt was still active. She could have filed the paperwork that afternoon, triggered a lien on his assets, frozen his accounts, sent certified letters to every partner, sponsor, and investor in his shiny new world. She could have crushed the little empire he built out of stolen promises and borrowed charm. But she didn't. Instead, she took the signed legal notice and slid it into a manila folder marked "Future Consideration." She placed it in her drawer beneath a stack of old family photos, between her husband's will and a letter she'd never mailed. That button, the legal process, the hammer, the fire, it sat there waiting, fully loaded, one press away. But she didn't press it, because she wanted him to know she could. Every time his phone rang with a blocked number, every time a bank double-checked his credit, every time he stood on stage teaching financial empowerment, she wanted him to feel that edge behind his smile. That shadow, that presence. The cold, quiet pressure of a debt he no longer controlled. She didn't want an apology. Not anymore. She didn't believe in them. An apology is a door that lets pain walk back in. What she believed in now was memory and consequence, and the slow, deliberate ache of knowing you are being watched by the one person you once thought was too soft to fight. Her granddaughter visited the next day, brought sweet mango and a pink card with glitter hearts. "Happy late birthday, Grandma," she said. "Sorry we forgot." Leon smiled, genuinely. "I didn't mind," she said. "I remembered it myself." That night, she sat by the window, the city lights flickering below, her tea cooling beside her. She didn't think about him. She thought about herself, about the girl she used to be, the woman she had become, and the quiet kind of strength no one ever teaches you. The kind you build alone, in the dark, bill by unpaid bill. She reached for the envelope one last time, held it in her hands, and then she put it back. Because letting someone live with fear is sometimes louder than finishing the job. The world would go on. He would go on. But now, he would live every day knowing that somewhere out there, in a small apartment with faded curtains and an old rice cooker, a woman he had buried in debt was still holding the trigger. She didn't need to press it. He would hear it ticking anyway. And she never pressed the button. Not because she forgave him, but because she didn't have to. Some debts echo louder when left unpaid. But you know, not every story ends in silence. Because somewhere else, another grandmother's keeping a different kind of secret. And she's not the type to hold back. You'll see soon. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Real Stories. There's always another truth waiting to surface.